basically risk-free, but you are also borrowing at such humongous rates that you also crowd out the real sector from the market. So the question is, the cost of borrowing is a little bit suspect because you cannot be borrowing to cover a deficit when you have and you are sharing a surplus, especially even now when you have an excess crude account of $10 billion plus sovereign wealth of possibly another $1 billion, which earn, for example, yields which are really, really, really minimal. Meanwhile, and you leave that aside and say, look, I won't touch that. If I have to touch that excess crude account, it's for me to be able to spend it. But this deficit, which I have already projected into my budget, I will borrow at whatever cost in order to be able to fix the deficit, in spite of the fact that you are driving out or you're crowding out the real sector. So
well,
that's the cause.
That's
the cause. Now, apart from the cause, as I've said, what is responsible for the high cost of borrowing? Why is our situation different? Is it that the interest rates are imposed externally upon our system? The answer again is no.
Doesn't the market determine? Because yes, that's what has gotten us into where we are today. Domestic debt, $6 trillion. The cost of servicing it is just absolutely ridiculous. And now we have that sinking fund. So I mean, many analysts say, well, the market determines. If you want to put it at 12%,
absolutely right. The market determines. And what does market mechanism means? Market mechanism, demand and supply. Okay? Right. I mean, that's what market mechanism is. So when you say the market determines it, you mean that demand and supply forces. Of course, that's what happens. When you have a situation or an environment or an economy that is always cash-laden with excess liquidity, I'm sure in this station you guys know what excess liquidity means. It means that amount of money that is way and above the legal requirement that a bank should hold cash. In other words, at the moment, the cash reserve ratio is 12%, okay? Meaning that if a bank has, for example, 12 naira as the deposit, it can lend out possibly anything up to 100 naira based on that cash reserve basis. So you have a situation where, because the central bank itself is instigating excess liquidity, it pushes money into the hands of the bank. Just like in April, the amount of 720 billion naira was shared out to the three tiers of government in April. Out of that 720 billion, possibly about $4 billion was dollars. Okay, the CBN captures the dollars and prints naira and puts in its place. When the banks get this, don't forget the earlier example I gave. The 720 billion that was put in the hands of the banks become available for lending for as much as 7.2 trillion naira. That is what you call excess liquidity. If the central bank allows that amount of money to remain in the system, it would create inflation.
Obviously.
But don't forget, who created that money in the first place? The same central bank. So I'm telling you now why the cost of our own local borrowing is adverse. Okay? So consequently, because of this huge cash that central bank puts in the hands of the banks, they can expand their credits enormously and would endanger inflation. And inflation, of course, is a common plague for every one of us. So consequently, what happens? They have to tempt the banks to part with the money with a high rate of interest. Okay? And this time, that's why you have a monetary policy rate that's 12%. Consequently, if you want the banks to come borrow from you at 12%, you must be offering them something higher. So you have to offer them a higher interest in order to take this money out of their hands and reduce the threat of inflation. And for taking the joy of taking out this money, you are prepared to pay 12%, 13% for money that you are not going to use. So the reason why the Minister of Finance is saying, domestic borrowing is too expensive, I'm telling you, this is the reality.
Well, now they have realized that, yes, they can no longer afford the servicing.
Absolutely, but the point is, who causes it and how does it, you must, if you want to find out or heal anything, you must find out first the cause, okay? And that's what I'm telling you, that is how it comes about, that we have a high interest rate structure in the country, which unfortunately and inadvertently also government debt also becomes a victim, because invariably the government also has to borrow at these higher rates of interest, even though the whole process of instituting a high interest rate structure was instigated ab initio by a government agency
the monetary
called
authorities.
Central Bank.
Oh, yes,
okay?
the fiscal authorities, they are trying to get out of that right now. That's why they put up that 100 billion sinking fund, but you're to retire those local bonds, but you're still not confident in that 100 billion sinking fund.
Look at it. I mean, this is simple ABC, you know. We owe 6 trillion naira as domestic debt. That's 6,000 billion, okay? And 6 trillion naira, 6 billion naira as external debt. 6,000 billion. Let's assume that you're putting aside 100 billion every month, every year, in order to, it will take you 60 years to service it. And then somebody, a minister of finance now comes, oh, we have realized our mistake. In order to be able to liquidate these debts, okay, we are going to borrow externally so that we can use it to liquidate. You're in trouble. Because if you are borrowing to liquidate your debt, like we are robbing Peter to pay Paul, anybody who gives you a sense of comfort is a false sense of comfort, because once you start borrowing in order to pay your debts, you are in problem. So I've discussed with you the cause of the debt. I have also told you why it is so high. The point is who creates it. And the creator, of course, as I've explained to you, is the central bank.
We'll talk more about that. We need to take a break at this point to talk more about government borrowing plans, looking at Nigeria's current loan stock. Of course, the federal government is still set to borrow more money this year, especially from the external arm. I've been talking to an economist, Henry Boyo. We'll take a break at this point and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We've been looking at Nigeria's debt profile, both domestic and foreign, and I've been talking to an economist, Henry Boyo. Now, Henry, before we went on the break, we were talking about that sinking fund, 100 billion, and you said, you know, it would take us 60 years if we were to put aside perhaps 100 billion every year. Now, what would you, how is the best way, what's the best way to retire these funds?
It is clear, of course, that the government itself is confused. They don't know, because otherwise they would have realized that...
Well, they have put options on the table. Perhaps borrow long-term debt to pay off short-term debt, or go to concessionary windows, the IMF, the World Bank. Although you promoted us to...
Exactly.
But still, couldn't we still retain the kind of loans we take where the concessionary rates are still...
You see, that's the whole point. You're taking these concessionary loans. In the past, we have taken these concessionary loans, and they were supposed to be dedicated to infrastructural enhancement. We have found that not to be true. Now they have come clean on this occasion to say, we're not taking these loans now, external loans, in order for XYZ infrastructure. We are taking it because we want to use it to liquidate existing loans. That's why I say we're in crisis.
Yeah, well, those loans were meant for infrastructure, to plug the infrastructure deficit,
which they didn't
but
do.
Now there's, well, they didn't say that, but they're saying, okay, now
it's not a question
in the process of doing that, we got into trouble. We realize now.
Don't let. I mean, I know you're trying to protect.
I'm telling you,
have they, not what they said, but what is real? What do you yourself see? Have you seen
any... When I look at the numbers.
Not the numbers, in reality.
Okay.
How do you see improvements that